All right, it is 2 o'clock. Panelists, thumbs up if you are ready to go. And with that, we will begin. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Democracy Prep Public Schools Black Lives Matter Community Conversation. My name is Rashid DeRosso. I'm the Civics Program Director here at Democracy Prep. I'm very excited for today's conversation. Just a couple of notes before we dive in. First, this is going to be recorded. We want to ensure that anyone who was not able to attend is going to be able to hear the conversation and participate in the conversation later on. And number two, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, please place your questions in the Q&A section and then place your comments in the chat function. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Ms. Trivers.
Thank you, Rashid. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm the mother of 2 Black sons and a daughter, Kofi, Lucas, and Kate. I'm a wife to a large Black man, Jonathan. I'm sister to 2 Black men and 3 Black sisters, and I'm daughter to Lorna, a Jamaican-American woman who is fierce and has a long memory. I'm also CEO of Democracy Prep, educating 7,200 scholars across 5 different regions. And I have to tell you, I'm exhausted, I'm dejected, I'm angry, I'm fearful, and yet I'm filled with optimism and dread kind of simultaneously at this moment. Optimism because I'm encouraged by the fact that my countrymen are not taking this lying down. Optimism because when I think of how far so many organizations have come in terms of even using the phrase Black Lives Matter and not being worried about political connotation or fallout, it gives me hope. But dread because it took so long to get here and we're still marking new murders each day. Dread because while orgs are using the term Black Lives Matter, they're not always reflecting on all the school systems, philosophies, and methods of control that are still problematic. They are not evaluating how they breed inequity themselves, and I include Democracy Prep in that. Dread because of the irony of what happened to Colin Kaepernick in this country. Dread because while there are many white allies fighting with us, I also wonder what this will translate to in the future. Is this just a fleeting moment in time? What will they do the next time someone at their dinner table says, well, he must have been resisting arrest. He must have done something violent for the officer to react that way. He must have been committing a crime. What will they do? What will they say? What about the next time a white colleague says something insensitive about violence done consistently to Black bodies in their presence, so in the presence of white allies? What about when they're in the voting booth alone and free from any external gaze? What will really change? Will we leverage this moment effectively? Will we continue this fight for months and years to come? So I'm really thankful for today. I'm thankful for Princess Lyles and Rashid DeRosso for all of their work in putting this together. I'm thankful for Lauren McLean for always making sure we think through translating for our multilingual stakeholders. I'm thankful for so many educators and scholars at Democracy Prep who have pushed me and pushed us to be better over time. I am so thankful for our panelists today. I'm hoping you can help me reconcile my feelings of optimism and dread, help me process, and help me forge a path forward. We have to act. The question is how. So with that, I turn it over to Rashid to introduce our amazing panelists.
Thank you. And before we do that, we're going to take just a moment of silence to remember the lives that have been lost. We're very excited to introduce our panelists for today's session. First, we have Emmanuel George, Principal of Democracy Prep Endurance High School, Mr. Joshua Rivera, Principal, Freedom Prep High School, Ariana Cummings, a Senior at Democracy Prep Charter High School, Oleandro Smith, a Junior, Democracy Prep Harlem High School, Abdul Ajomarin, Senior, Bronx Prep High School. We're joined by Myra Richardson, a youth activist from the Baton Rouge region, and Dorian Hammond, a parent of Democracy Prep Pathway Scholars. Thank you all for being here. We're really looking forward to the conversation, and we hope that it's meaningful for everyone involved.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll begin our conversation.
Thank you, Rashid, and welcome, panelists. We are so fortunate to have you today. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to kick us off with our first question. For the past 7 days, protests have been staged across the country and around the world in response to the killing of George Floyd, an unarmed Black man who was arrested after being accused of buying cigarettes with a counterfeit $20 bill. The white police officer who has been charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter knelt on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 43 seconds. Tragically, the killing of unarmed Black men and women in the United States happens disproportionately and with terrifying frequency. That said, with over 250 protests, 400 arrests, and dozens of riots across the country over the past week, the scale of the outrage we are seeing in response to this injustice is unlike anything this nation has witnessed in decades. What is at the root of the scale of the outrage we are witnessing right now? Myra, can we start with you for that one?
Right. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I really just want us to take a moment to take in perspective all of the things that are going on in this country. And I think that the narrative being distorted quite a bit because there are just so many things going on. And I think that atmospheric pressures, because we're in COVID, people have been home, people have been dealing with a sense of helplessness, and then mounting it with the death of George Floyd and the continuous helplessness that Black people face and being re-traumatized every time you have to see one of our Black brothers or sisters murdered in broad daylight in most causes without any type of retribution. So I think when we talk about the root cause of it, I think it's all of the unanswered questions that our communities have had to face. I think it's all of the lack of responsibility people have yet to take or have yet to take the mantle of. And I think even more so here in Baton Rouge in Louisiana, after the murder of Alton Sterling, my peers and I were able to organize around that. And it's still to this day that we aren't able to get a lot of those answers because I think we have a Black mayor, we have a Black chief of police, we have a Black city parish attorney, but Black faces don't necessarily end systemic issues. So I think there's a lot of critical work that we have to do to get to the root cause of these things. And I think it's all led back to systemic issues. So I think that is a large problem. And I'm talking about even in our education system, there are systemic issues we have yet to overcome, even though there is critical work being done every day, chipping away at it. I think that this violence is probably one of the pathways to start saying what is critically wrong with us and why are we demonizing just Black people for problems America has created for itself.
Thank you, Myra. I would love to turn to a fellow parent here, Mr. Hammond, to see how you'd answer that question. What is at the root of the scale of the outrage we are now seeing and the protests mushrooming across the country and even mushrooming up in other countries in the world? What's at the root of the scale of this outrage?
What's at the root of it is the lack of love and how they push on us self-hate. When you look at a lot of the media and things that's being invested into, and you listen to a lot of the music that's being invested into and how it's derogatory and it shows Black and brown bodies as dysfunctional, the family households, it shows that's dysfunctional and how they can't get along and how we just are like at the bottom of this pyramid scheme that they have. And it's like a manufactured reality and it's being programmed to children, and these Black and brown bodies in the inner cities and it's being programmed to them in their programming and the shows and the things that they watch. It's like the Black lives is devalued, and it doesn't show them being valued. And I struggle with it now with my children, where they watch a lot of, white shows where they relate better to the white characters and how the white characters have the best, positions and titles. So I'm gonna say the root of it is the lack of love and how we're being taught to hate ourselves. And just going back to Brown versus the education, when they did the testing of the doll, I believe the young lady was 8 years old, 9 years old. Don't quote me on the age, but just going back to that, where they had her make a comparison from a white doll to a Black doll, and she was able to relate to the Black doll. They asked her questions on which doll looked more beautiful or anything like that, somewhat into that concept. That was the questioning, and she said that the white doll was beautiful, and then they was like, which doll is ugly, and she referred to the Black doll, and then they asked her, what doll do you look like? And she grimaced, and she kind of went into silence, and then she chose the Black doll. But we just talking about the continuous, perpetual cycle of self-hate, how we're being programmed to hate ourselves and see that our lives don't matter. Just the continuing images of seeing Black and brown bodies being destroyed, for them to say that George Floyd deserved that because he possibly, or the allegation is that he had used a fake $20 bill to purchase a pack of cigarettes. If the case have it that he did have a counterfeit $20 bill, we talking about how counterfeit money cycle around these communities and go back and forth, and it can end up in anybody's hand. And to say that if I made a mistake and gave my child a counterfeit bill, and to understand that they should be treated this way, this is what they believe is the proper treatment for an individual walking into a store with a counterfeit bill. So the root of it is hate, and the Black and brown bodies are considered minority. So we like the babies, and right now what's happening throughout the world is that the babies is crying out. It's so much outrage, there's so much pain, so much trauma, and the babies is crying out right now. And that's why you see the tantrums, they destroying property, they running in stores. And then you have the peaceful protesters that's going about it, the right way. That's the root of it, is that the babies just crying out, and they're going into tantrum. Some of them don't know what to do, some know what to do. And at this moment in time, we just need to gather together and strategize and take this moment and really use it. So what the young lady that was just speaking was talking about, to really use this time and just strategize and address those systemic issues that we face till this day.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond, giving us a lot to chew on there in terms of systemic issues in our communities, and also really problematic portrayals in the media and in pop culture and in songs as being part of the problem, for sure. I would love to hear from our young people. We have three scholars with us today, Ariana, Oleandro, and Abdul. Any one of the three of you, if you feel compelled to answer this one, about just why would you say there's the scale of outrage right now? What's at the root of that? What would be your answer?
I would say I agree with what the previous person have said. Like, the hatred is somewhat of the reason why. I feel like it's just been so long, like it's just a sore, like we haven't healed from like what we've been going through since like the past, like since slavery, and like that wound that was inflicted on us hasn't healed yet, and it's just only gotten worse. So when something like this happens in our community, it's just, we have no other escape. Like it seems like no one's been able to understand us, and what we're going through as like a community and society, and they just ignore us. And I believe that it's getting to a point where like we're fed up with them ignoring us in our calls and trying to help, but not really helping in the same way. And it's just, we're done with all the talking and waiting, and now we're ready for action.
Thank you. Abdul or Ariana, is there anything else that you wanted to add on to that?
My 2 cents is that I believe that the root cause of this is just like years and years of systemic oppression. Um, I was blessed with the opportunity to go to Senegal with Democracy Prep, one of their international trips, and like like Mr. Hammond said, there's a lot of there like the media portrayed Black people as a sore to the United States history, which is actually very ironic because we helped build the country. While I was at Senegal, I was able to see that there's a lot of beauty in our culture. There's a lot of beauty in being Black, a lot of beauty in being African, and that's why I take my pride seriously. As a Black man and as a Black young man in America, it's actually really hard to now seeing this that it can really happen to any of us. Like I could be jogging down the road, I could get killed, I could be like doing anything, walking down the street with a do-rag on and be racially profiled. It's just really scary. And then years of being oppressed without justice, seeing things on in our history books like what happened to Emmett Till, Trayvon Martin, many different scenarios in our communities that has caused us to be angry and finally say enough is enough, because all this talking, all this discourse is not really helping. So that's the only way people find a way to express themselves.
Thank you, Abdul. Ariana, Mr. George, and Mr. Rivera, I'm coming to you next. I'm going to ask a new question, but of course, if you want to add on at all about sort of the scale of the outrage from question number one, you can add as well. We've seen a variety of responses to police brutality and racial disparities in the justice system, ranging from conventional appeals for new legislation to more direct action campaigns like the protests happening right now. What, in your opinion, is the most effective way to address the injustice so many Americans are grappling with, as educators, as young Black and brown scholars, as activists, as parents? Mr. George, I'm going to turn that one over to you, but then I'd love to hear from Ariana and Mr. Rivera as well.
I think the two questions are kind of synonymous, actually. I think that people are in a position where we consistently see that our lives are devalued. We don't have the access to basic humanity that we deserve as just citizens of the planet. And I think for us, we as African Americans, our lives are at risk at any moment for doing things that are just common: jogging, walking, playing cops and robbers. And also, we don't have the space to protest thoughtfully. There was a big brouhaha about Colin Kaepernick a few years ago, and we saw, one, that he was right, and two, the behaviors haven't changed, they've gotten worse. I think it's a mixed methods approach. I don't think there's one right way to look at how you can stem the tide. But there are a few things that need to happen, and different constituencies of people need to make sure that we do our part. Holistically, direct action will lead to legislative change, right? Like, people pay attention to the people that vote for them. And I think part of it says on the slide, Democracy Prep Civics program is becoming civically engaged, and not just voting, but understanding the push and pull factors that influence your vote. What look at the news. Why is what's happening? What is the history behind it? And I think for us as just common people, the protest and the education will spur direct legislative action, because people have to respond. Politicians work for their voters. And if you want to get elected, you're going to think about the constituencies that you want to serve. For example, in the Democratic Party, many people many Democratic politicians in the 90s were set on like, get tough, you know, crime. We want to prove that we're tougher than the Republicans on mass incarceration. That hasn't worked. You know, so I mean, quite frankly, it hasn't worked. I mean, Bill Clinton signed the law in like 94. Look what it's done, right? So now the Democratic Party is taking a platform where it's more, is more geared towards finding holistic solutions as opposed to punishment-based solutions. So now you have Joe Biden. How does he respond? He responds as a potential presidential candidate by going out and engaging with protesters and Black leaders in Delaware and making a speech that he made this morning in Philadelphia. I think those things kind of push and pull together. And I think it's important for us to understand that we have the ability as citizens to drive politicians with our daily actions and being really civically engaged to understand the push and pull factors, the why behind these issues that are happening to us on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you for that, Emmanuel. For those of us just joining or joining a little bit later than 2, we will have questions pulled from the audience right around 3 o'clock, but we're going to continue to hear from our panel a little bit more. Mr. Rivera and then Ariana, is there anything else you'd add to that question around what is the best way to respond to these injustices?
Yeah, I think to echo what Mr. George said, there is not one most effective approach. It must be a multifaceted approach that all of us take equal responsibility in doing. And I think simply because we all have a responsibility to work against what is happening, whether you are Black or brown, or you are white, or a student in democracy prep, or a parent, or whether you are a politician, we all have an equal responsibility to make sure that we are moving in the same direction. However, we all don't have the same influence over specific domains. We don't have the same power. We don't have that same opportunity in order to enact that in order to enact that change. And so it's incredibly important that we're all doing our part. I think the protester that's happening right now is a beautiful thing around the entire country. And while the media is going to try and put the looting and some of the more violent pieces of it in our faces to try to distract us from what's important, the protesters out there are doing amazing work to ensure that this is being called upon, to ensure that people are uniting in that anger and that frustration and letting them know, like, no, it's not okay. I think from a legal standpoint, we have, as Mr. George stated, we have members of Congress and politicians who it's their responsibility to answer to those who voted them in, and to make sure that they're doing and acting in the way that they promised when they told us that they were going to, do X, Y, and Z when they were elected. I think as teachers, as parents, as family members, we have a responsibility to have these conversations with each other, to not be silent at the dinner table, and to talk about these things with each other, to talk about our emotions, to get that frustration out, so that we can better educate those around us who we know are not thinking in the ways that they need to in order to work toward racial justice. I think we have a responsibility as parents to talk to our kids. Our kids are growing up in this world, whether we like it or not, and to not shield them from these really important conversations as they become age appropriate. And we have a responsibility to take a look at our employer practices, employer policies, and to educate our friends and our family members, as I stated, because we all have an equal responsibility because we all live in this world together. And as you stated, Ms. Rivers, these are our countrymen, and we're in this together, and we all have a responsibility to take that multifaceted approach.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Ariana, I want to make sure I get your voice in there. Was there anything else you wanted to add here?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is that in terms of like the protests and stuff, I think what we need most at this time is like persistence and organization. Because like over these past few years, yeah, we've had protests and yes, media, but then it's eventually died down and we have to wait until the next Black body is attacked for us to speak out again. And I feel like what we need right now is for us to like not let up and like keep having our voice heard and keep doing these protests. And I think that in terms of how like the protests are, I believe that we can't really designate one approach, because that's how things are not getting accomplished. Because when we do the peaceful protests at the White House, they got attacked for peaceful protesting. And then when they do the rioting, they're they're being shown as violent and stuff like that. So I feel like when we have one approach, that's when our message is, when we have only like one specific thing that we do, that's when our message is diluted, and that's when they can like paint us out to be what we're really not. So I feel like what we need is to keep on going and keep on making sure that we're not letting up, and we're showing them that we're serious about this at this time, and that we want this to be the last time that it happened.
Thank you so much, Ariana. Myra, was there anything else you want to add to that before I turn the mic over to Rashid for our next question?
Yeah, it's just very quickly. I think I just want to uplift the fact that I think President Obama said it just poignantly on yesterday at such a critical point in where we needed a logical voice. We needed a voice of reason right now during these times in America and all of the things that are going on. And he said it so poignantly that it's not either or, it's political and it's protest. It's not just saying civil unrest. It's not just not voting or going voting. It's both of those things to counteract each other, because you need one to get to the other. Both hands feed each other. And I think even more so as a youth activist, what we've seen here on the ground at 21 years old, twice since Alton Sterling, we've been able to lead peaceful protests, gathering people from around the country after Alton Sterling's murder. But even more so, just on this past Sunday, it was 3 high school students that were able to bring 4,000 people from around the Baton Rouge area to peacefully protest, organize, and strategize with demands. And these demands were based in accountability. These demands were based in understanding power mapping and understanding that it's not just your president, it's your local governments, it's your judges, it's your DAs, it's your city parish attorneys, it's your principals, it's the Bessie board, it's the different systems that give people power to do what they want to do, that oppress our communities. So I think it is about us being more strategic about building capacity and power mapping. And I think that's kind of what the young lady was saying, and the young man as well, is that we begin to become more strategic, we will begin to see not just these protests, but the outcomes that feed from them, that this was the power we pressed on their necks to get what we needed done. So I'm very, very proud of what's going on around the country. And if the country had been patting us on the back for protests and looting and all these different things, we would be doing something wrong, because protests are not meant to get a high five. They're meant to shake the table. They're meant to get a response so that you can achieve a higher goal.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Myra. Rashid, you want to lead us to our next question?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and think about our context specifically as an organization working with young people and families. So many adults, parents, and educators alike struggle sometimes to address issues of racial inequality and police brutality for a variety of reasons. Ta-Nehisi Coates, echoing James Baldwin, wrote, "I'd have you be a conscious citizen of this terrible and beautiful world." How can adults balance showing young people the world as it is so that they can change it, with allowing them to hold on to their innocence as children? I'd love by starting with one of the current DP scholars, and then we can move on to another group.
Would you like to repeat the question over a little bit slowly?
Sure. Essentially, how can adults balance showing our young people the world as it is, with all of the injustice, everything going on, with also allowing them to hold on to their innocence? Where is the balance?
From my point of view, I don't feel like to be honest, for me, I don't feel like you could really, there's really no way to hide. Like, I can't find it. For me, if I was to have like my own children in the future, I wouldn't be able to like find a balance between my child's innocence and telling them the harsh reality, because this is the harsh reality that we live in the world today. Like, we're gonna get targeted. Hopefully in the future, I wouldn't have to have that conversation with my children. But as of right now, like in terms of the people who like the older people, like Ms. Trivers or Ms. Hammond or Mr. Hammond that have children, I feel like those conversations, like you would have to be very blunt, but you don't have to be, as graphic, tell them about that, actually like go into detail about what's going on, but like you would have to tell them to be careful, the harsh truth of what's going on what's going on in the world. Also, I feel like you should be able to, you know, teach them our history. You know what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying? For me, travel is also a good way. Travel, when you travel, you learn new things, and that's what Democracy Prep has done well with our with DP scholars. We've been able to travel. We've been able to go through to different countries and see how they're living, and then we come back with a new mindset when we come back to the States.
Thank you. I'd like to invite another scholar to jump in here.
Okay. I feel like finding the correct balance would be to be honest about the Black experience, because the Black experience is not all bad. Like everything we do, it doesn't have to do with being murdered and always having to face all these problems. We do have positive things that happen in our community. And I feel like if we're honest about that in schools and we do depict, oh yeah, like this happened to a Black person, this happened, but we also have those celebrations of Black culture and we have these intricate Black history celebrations. That's the way that you keep the balance. Let children know that yes, stuff happens and stuff is terrible in this world, but we don't have to lose all hope. And we can show that by having a community and like being honest in the way we talk about stuff, because honesty would show both of those spectrums. It wouldn't just show the bad stuff that happened.
To add on to your point, both of you guys' points, I feel like the balance becomes where it's like you have to tell both sides of the spectrum, because you can't hold back the harsh reality and allow and to fully believe that they will understand like the world that they're living in. I feel like you have to be as blunt as possible and just know that like you can't sugarcoat what's really happening to them, because then they're not going to take it as serious, because they unfortunately have to be on guard or scared, but that scared being frightened will keep them alive, you know. Like being scared makes you alert, but you also got to show them the beauty of our culture. You can't just press on them the harsh reality that we're living through and then not show them the beauty of like who we are.
I would also like to add on to Ariana's point. I really think that's a very valuable point about also the last person that just speak. I'm sorry if I don't know your name, but I would like to add on to their point. I feel like those are very valuable points about teaching us about like the good things that Black people have done, because the main issue is that there's a lot of self-hate because people don't really know the great things that we have done. The media has really media has really damaged the black narrative, you know what I'm saying? Like they try to make it seem like, oh, that we haven't done anything. Like on TV, the Africans built the pyramids. Africans built the pyramids, which is a great structure. But on TV, on History Channel, you will see the History Channel, which is mostly run by white men. They they switch the story and make it seem like, oh, Black people couldn't do it, couldn't make something that phenomenal. They'll try to be like, oh, maybe extraterrestrials was able to help them, but no, Black people have really great history. There's been many great Black people like Mansa Musa who have done great things in the past. Those are things that we need to uh, tell our like our future, because we are our generation is the future. So what we tell our what we like how we educate our children is the way that we will bring about change in the future.
Thank you. And before I invite our other panelists to speak, we received one question from the audience that's really pertinent. And so it's still directed to the scholars. But the question is, if you could point to one class or lesson in your time at DP that's hit the mark in terms of constructively addressing systems of racism and oppression, what would that class be? And why?
All right, for me, definitely it would be a history class. Um, because I, to be specific, it was a ninth grade history class with Mr. Aaron. I feel like Mr. Aaron did a great job at making sure that we're very educated on what's going on in the past with all the different like early civilizations that we learned about. He made sure to touch upon uh, African civilizations because African civilizations were one of the best and one of the most wealthiest civilizations in the past. And those learning about those really like showed me that I have a rich history and that like I shouldn't like have any self hate. Also, another class that was very helpful was my senior not a literature class, seminar in American democracy. We learned about different we learned about different issues in the Black community that's like destroyed the Black community, like such things like colorism. Colorism is really one thing that has really destroyed the community, and and is very like that fuels self hate. If you know what I'm saying. Yeah, that's basically my point.
Alejandro or Ariana, anything you'd add there in terms of the best class or best content that you experienced at Democracy Prep and what we should be replicating?
Yes, I think the best class that I've had and the best content that was delivered to me was the Black Experience class that I had, and it was brought to DP by Miss Chivers, but then it was like um, continued by Miss Long as a teacher at my school, and I felt like that class was the most powerful for me because we not only learned about the things that we wouldn't get in like other literature classes, like we didn't learn just the classic books and stuff like that. Like we still read those, but we also learned about like how we could better impact our society as like Black students, and how we could be potentially oppressed in that expression. And we also learned about like the school to prison pipeline and parallels to our school that didn't necessarily attack our school, but made us more aware of what could of what it could look like changing our school for the better. So, I mean, being more honest about the conversation about what things could change in our school, because not any school is perfect, and not any school fully satisfies the agenda that it wants to have. And that's the point of a school, because you want things to get better every time. And you want students to be able to feel comfortable giving critique to the school. And I feel like that's what that class did. And to let us know that it was okay to do that in the same moment.
I feel like the best class to like learn like our history is history class. And like for this year history class, like when we went over like discussions about slavery or inequality due towards Black people, we've discussed it, and we have our own conversations and debate of what we think and our opinions of it. And I feel like that is necessary for us to like get out what our frustration may be or any questions we have, and to just talk to each other like as a whole, rather than keeping those thoughts inside. So yeah.
Thank you. And so to return to the original question, and Mr. Hammond, we'd love your thoughts here. How do we strike that balance between ensuring our scholars see the world as it is, but we still hold on to some form of them remaining children, holding on to their innocence?
For me, for me, the answer to that question will be showing the true history of African Americans, going back to the motherland and seeing the contribution that they contributed to the world, and showing them and talking about how all cultures and ethnicities from all 7 continents came to the motherland to learn their ways, to learn best practices at social civilization, knowing that Africa was one of the first originals with a social system, with one of the best, and that other countries came in to learn from them and sat at the feet of our ancestors and learned ways, well, from farming to architecture to civilization to fashion, silk, and etc. And letting the people, young people know, letting my children know that you have greatness in you, and it's an enemy out there that don't want you to know about your greatness, that don't want you to know your value. So they're gonna lie to you and tell you that you're a savage, but it's not in your nature to be a savage. And then I will talk to them about the cold hard facts of slavery, to where it's written that they hung a pregnant woman, a pregnant Black woman, cut her stomach open. I'm sorry to be so raw with this content, but they cut her stomach open, stepped on the baby's head, cut the baby out her stomach, stepped on the baby's head. And these same individuals call Black and brown people savages. They fought over who was gonna cut the nose off of burnt slaves, hung slaves. They cut body parts off and sent it in the mail as Christmas cards. And then again, these same people call Black and brown young people slaves, predators. But this is what they practice, the savagery. But what they actually put out is what they call us. And then they want to consider themselves the greatness, the hierarchy, the kings and the queens. But they practice these ways towards us, which was savagery, and they put it on us that we are the savages. So right now, what you're seeing in these protests. So I will talk about Tulsa, Oklahoma, how off an allegation of a Black boy trying to talk to a white woman or have done something immoral to a white woman, to where they killed thousands. So we would talk about the first act of terrorism in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that will answer, the question of trying to create this balance and allow my children to keep their innocence, to allow youth to keep their innocence in this conversation. So it has to be a real dialogue, and we have to understand what media is showing to them. We have to continuously be informal on what avenues and what things was being opened in our children due to media, which we no longer have control over. We're talking about regular Disney Channel, talking about some immoral things that you wouldn't teach in your household, but being that you think Disney is okay, you allow your child to watch that for some time. And then when you come and sit and watch it with your child, you like, what? They talking like that on there? Like, I wouldn't allow you to talk like that in the household. So you could discontinue watching that. Like, you can't talk like that. And it's white characters and also, the paid Black characters. But that will be along the lines on how we'll create that barrier of letting my kids know what's really going on and helping them keep their innocence, that you are great, you are powerful, and people are going to tell you otherwise because they don't want you to exhibit that power. They don't want you to reach that.
Thank you. I'd love to hear from either Mr. George or Mr. Rivera. Same question. Again, just asking how we strike the balance between exposing our scholars to the truths of this world while also holding on to some form of their innocence and childhood.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I just wanted to shout out the students and their responses. You guys are fantastic and super brave for being up here to begin with. But you guys, that was extremely well said. I just want to sort of echo what was just said by the parent there. I mean, teaching the history is so crucial, and teaching the why behind why a lot of things are happening. Students are hungry and eager to learn, and blanket statements of, there's people out there trying to hurt you, and this is what you're going to experience, and all of these things, that is important, and that's absolutely crucial, and that's necessary. I've had those conversations with my son when he comes home from school. He goes to an all-white school, essentially, and he asks me why all of his classmates and his teachers hate immigrants, and why they're very pro-Trump, and how he feels the need to honestly defend and consistently criticize that type of thought process. But in addition to teaching him what he can expect in the real world, I teach him the history where a lot of that thought process comes from. What does it mean to be Republican? What does it mean to be conservative? What does it mean? What are the differences between the two? Because they're often confused. What does it mean to live on the East Coast as a white or person of color, as opposed to living in the middle of the country as a white or person of color, and how those thought processes are just different. So I think the history and the context is incredibly important. I also think it's important to teach the youth not only what to expect and some of that context, but what they can do about it and what they should be doing about it and how they can be thinking about it. And it's incredibly important to use probing questions, allow the youth and allow students and allow kids to be able to ask questions, allow them to formulate their own thoughts. Because oftentimes we're coming from a place of bias as well. And we have some of these ingrained thought processes and fears and experiences that we've had, taken into this world that we're putting onto our children. And a lot of that is accurate, but a lot of that too comes from a place where, we ourselves also, there's some changing to be done. So I think engaging with them, asking them those really important questions, allowing them to formulate their own thoughts, allowing them to question society, and to go into the world with that understanding of, I know the context, I've been asked the right questions, and now I know that I'm powerful enough to do something about it.
Our kids are able to maintain their innocence if they have consistent interactions with knowledgeable people. I think we as adults have a sense of innocence at times because we can live in a world that's consistent and fair, and we can access information. I think I'm gonna take a different tack. I think as educators, there are a few things that we have to do in order to provide those spaces for kids to have those honest dialogues so they can be knowledgeable and maintain their innocence. One, we have to, and this pushes me as the leader to, what are the overarching and implicit and explicit structures for kids to express themselves and to have that dialogue? How do we leverage advisory time, things of that nature? What are the avenues for kids do they have to really express themselves thoughtfully? But I think more importantly is knowledge. I think if we are working with students of color, we have to have at the very least a working knowledge of basic cultural tenets. So we can have those discussions or facilitate those discussions from a sense of knowledge and not just from a sense of like what Josh said, like your own biases. Like we come to the table with our own biases because that's who we are and that's part of human nature. But having a working understanding of other people's cultures and having a deeper understanding of your own will allow our kids to have conversations with people who are knowledgeable, which will allow them to inform their own thoughts, their own processes, and their own development. I think if you are a teacher who is not Black, frankly, and you're working in a Black and brown neighborhood, essentially, it's incumbent upon you to have a working understanding behind the why. What does this look like? Why are people reacting so viscerally? Why is police brutality something that a group of people react viscerally to? And I really don't have that same experience or have that same reaction personally. It's incumbent upon us as leaders to facilitate spaces and conversation spaces where adults can have that conversations amongst themselves. We have to share that burden. It's not a situation where like the Black people, the teachers of color have to kind of like carry the load and carry the ball. It's a situation where everybody there should be some burden sharing. There should be some conversations. And I think there should be, from the leadership perspective, a space in place for teachers to learn more. And I think there also has to be the willingness, regardless of your socioeconomic or whatever status that you have, to engage in those conversations, because in a lot of cases, they are an amendment to the work that you do as educators. They're not like the lesson plans, or they're not, but those are things that can influence your lesson plans and influence the conversations that you have and provide those safe spaces for kids to have to gain knowledge from knowledgeable adults. I think the person outside of my family that taught me the most about being Black and helped me maintain my innocence was a white teacher from Minnesota. And his classes, I mean, my 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teacher, we learned stuff that I still remember to this day. I mean, I learned what Juneteenth was in the 4th grade. I learned how to look at movies critically and analyze them critically for racial overtones in the 6th grade. That teacher wasn't Black, didn't pretend to be Black, but he was knowledgeable enough about our experiences to convey information for us and allow us to develop our own thought processes, which then entailed kind of protecting my innocence, because I walked into the world and I knew what was happening to me and I knew why those things would happen. So I knew how to react when they did occur.
Thank you for that. I think it'd be powerful for us to actually spend a little bit more time along a similar thread. There are some people who don't immediately identify with the struggles that Black and brown people face on a daily basis. What message do you think that they need to hear in order for them to become better allies, better teachers, better colleagues, and even better friends? And I'd love to hear from Ms. Richardson first, and then open it up to the rest of the panelists.
Awesome. Could you just repeat the question for me a little bit?
Certainly. What message do you think people who don't immediately identify with the struggles of Black and brown folks right now, the daily struggles that they grapple with, what message do you think those people need to hear in order to become better allies, teachers, friends, colleagues?
Honestly, right now, with the state of the country and as it sits, and a lot of work that I'm doing, not only within myself, but within a lot of the organizations I'm working in, is that I don't think it's my responsibility to teach the oppressor how to not oppress me. I don't think it's my responsibility to have these conversations with you every day when there's so much work that I have to do in my own community. I think it's really some self-searching that a lot of people have to do amongst themselves. And I think that if you as a white ally, if you as a different person of color, or if you take the mantle upon yourself and say, like, I want to be different, and you take that initiative, I don't think that we should be, like, even in my comments right now, one of the demands that our youth made was that we wanted Juneteenth as a state holiday here. And we want all the states across the South to make it a state holiday. And, you know, a white person coming underneath our thread and saying, like, oh, what's Juneteenth? We don't mind telling you what it is, but it's also a point of what initiative are you taking? If you see the state of our country as it is, what are you taking upon yourself? What privilege are you checking in saying, what am I doing before I go to my Black peers, colleagues, coworkers, friends? What self-searching am I doing to rectify the situation? What am I trying to learn? Because I think when we think about the educational structure as it stands, Black people do not have an education that's saying, like, this is everything you need to know about Black people. This is what happened to your people in a thorough manner. This is the 4 little girls that died. This is in a church that was bombed, and we're talking about looting and people being violated right now. So I don't think that it is Black people's problem to explain it to other people what they should know or how they should feel, because we have so much work to do amongst ourselves. So my advice would be is to do your research, because my entire life experience is doing research. And I think it's, if you are a white educator, to be very cognizant, or a Black educator, educators period, our parental figures period, is to be very cautious of what you do to curiosity, because I think curiosity is one of the most important things in my own personal life that made me the activist that I am today. That when you are curious, you're going to seek this information yourself. So to everyone, be curious, to protect the curiosity of children the most, because at the end of the day, it's not going to change because Black people told a white person to do this. It's going to change because everybody collectively made the decision amongst themselves to say, what am I doing to progress this country forward? What am I doing to progress my city forward? What am I doing to progress my community forward? Because it starts at your family level. It starts at the individual level. What are you doing to move this country forward? What work or biases are you combating yourself in trying to understand, whether it be through sexuality, whether it be through race or religion? What are you combating on the daily basis to move our country better, to be more collective, to be more unified? And I think it's really and truly an individual work that we have to start with.
Thank you. Love to hear thoughts from our other panelists as well. We're just going to open it up to anyone who feels so inclined to jump in. So again, the question is, what can people who don't identify with the daily struggles of Black and brown folks do to be better allies, better friends, especially in light of what Ms. Richardson said? Is there a universal agreement? Are there different perspectives there? Thoughts?
I mean, Ms. Richardson said it succinctly. I think you just have to have a sense of intellectual flexibility so you can have some empathy, right? You have to think outside of your comfort zone so you can understand what other people are going through, even if the experience is different from your own. And I think that's just the simplest way for everybody to kind of understand the other and not participate in the otherization of folks like, oh, it's just them, it's them, it's those. Just take the time to look into, like Ms. Richardson said, be curious, have a sense of intellectual flexibility, challenge your preconceived notions that you already have. So you may not agree with certain viewpoints, but you can understand where people are coming from because of their experiences. What that will allow you to do is when you have that uncomfortable moment when you're faced with people who may think differently from them, you can engage in dialogue and not shut down and not shut them down based off of things that you already believe. I think the smarter people in the world are the people that are committed to being lifelong learners. And I think that is the best way to be an ally.
I definitely agree with Ms. Richardson and Mr. George about being intellectually flexible, because when people are closed-minded about issues like this and being indifferent about issues like this, that's something that perpetuates the issue in our country today. Most of the time that most of the people that you see online on social media, they often like to troll in the comments, and those are the people that I feel like are closed-minded about issues like this. They're often entrenched in the belief that like there's really nothing good that's associated with Black people, and that's why I feel like what Ms. Richardson said was very key. That it's not our job to really teach them how to be humans. Is basic like humanity skills. Those are being a good human, being a good ally to somebody that's also a human is something that's that shouldn't be taught. That's not something that I have to teach you. You should do your research to become a better become a better ally.
To add on, I agree with Ms. Richardson about us not it's not our responsibility to teach others how to support us. I feel like you should be able to take that initiative, and we can't force people to change. They have to change themselves. And I feel like the key point that Mr. George said is understanding, because all we want is just to be understood. That's why you get such a crazy reaction, because throughout this whole time, we've been treated with injustice and not being understood. And I feel like the first step is just to be able to understand where we're coming from, and like being able to like understand like the struggle that we go through on a day-to-day basis, and just trying to better like educate yourself about like what's going on and how this is affecting our community.
So before we go any further, I want to backpedal just a little bit, because it was a really strong assertion and I mean it, but I want to like add to it the fact that like I feel like we also need to give people a little grace. Like people I'm not just saying like white people deserve grace, but I'm saying like everybody, like collectively, like humanity needs to give itself a little grace. We need to be a little more gentle with ourselves and our own mental health. And I say this to say that I think we need to give ourselves permission to be in first draft. That now, I think this is uncharted territory in American history, in the sense that we are seeing women assert their dominance. We are seeing people say Black Lives Matter in a very like unapologetic way. We are seeing like this has never ever happened in history, where men are checking their privilege and saying, well, I don't know, I might be right, and she might wear a skirt, but she might have the answers. And these are people saying this in a very candid way and saying, what does real representation mean? What does real accountability mean? And I don't think our country has ever been held accountable to the things that it initially wrote on paper, that it basically created this fantasy land of freedom, of equity, of access, but it wasn't really activating itself, because simultaneously while it was writing these things, it was doing the complete opposite. So I think history and paper are now catching up with themselves, and it is having to reckon with that. And I think our country is really just going under that pressure now, saying, what does it mean to actually live up to the expectations we've created? And I think we just really have to give our community collectively, all communities, the permission to be in first draft and to say, okay, I've made a mistake here. I want to own up to that mistake. I want to edit it. I want to become a better version of myself, a better version of my community, because we all have work to do. Everybody, we all have reflective work to do, regardless of what you look like, where you come from. But I am still saying, take responsibility for what you be doing, period. Mm-hmm.
Yes, what that young lady just said was powerful. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep, we hear you.
Okay. I thought it froze for a second. Okay, so what that young lady just said was powerful, and that was along the lines of where I will go with it. The conversation will be, how do I play a part in this? And what part do I play, in this, what's going on? And from me speaking from a lens of once being a destroyer of my community, from peddling drugs, guns, violence, I was involved in it all. I even had a stint in prison where I served 3 to 5 years in prison. And then now I'm giving back to my community, bringing a message of hope. So I had entered into the belly of the beast, and now I'm back to reintroduce myself, understanding the part that I played in my own demise and separation myself from my purpose, and understanding now what power means in a community is connecting your community to resources. So understanding the part that I played, that will be the conversation I will have with someone that doesn't directly relate to what's going on now, to these injustices that don't relate right away directly, but also what the young lady was saying was allowing that room for grace. Because if I didn't give myself permission to heal, give myself permission for grace and to be forgiven to myself, I had to first forgive myself before I could be any good to my community or to my children. And I had to go through that process. So it was a process. It wasn't instant. You couldn't throw me in the microwave and pop me like popcorn. I had to go through a process of peeling off those layers of the self-hate and believing that all I could be was that violence, was that that hustler. I believed that was all I could be because of media images and things that was instilled into my head just by seeing images, just seeing what's going on in my community, and just seeing the lack of resources being contributed to my community. But understanding better now, I have to see, how do I play a part in this? And that would be the conversation that I will have with my counterpart is, where do you see yourself? How do you play a part in what's going on? Have you chosen to speak up? Have you chosen to suffer in this matter? And now I see during these protests that some of them are out there protesting, and they're actually suffering, and they being experienced directly with police brutality. I'm seeing them being beaten down with batons just for standing on the front line in a peaceful protest on a bike. I see the white man being beat down with a baton from a group of officers. And I say that that's suffering with us, and seeing how you play a part in this. And now that individual was standing up and speaking out in a protest, and just to continue to strategize and allow that grace. Yeah. And that'll be my piece. And that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Rashid, I would love to take a question from the audience, if that's all right. There's one question here. I think it was from a scholar, but don't quote me on that. Why has it taken Democracy Prep this long to finally have a conversation about this? And what steps would you take to continue this conversation for students? So I would love to take a stab at this and then ask Mr. George, Mr. Rivera, and the scholars if there's anything else you'd add. First, I think we have had some conversations about this in previous months, but nothing at this scale. I think the protests have propelled a larger conversation. I think if you ask that question from years ago, one thing I would say is that the founder of this organization was a white man, right? A white man with some good intentions, but he's not impervious to racism. He's not, you know, the building of this network was not impervious to racist systems being built in to the network. And I think in some ways in the charter sector, it was about being innovative and moving fast, but sometimes that means that some folks in the charter sector try to adopt kind of a formula. Well, if you have teachers that are kind of new to the classroom and they have not been teaching that long or managing classrooms that long, let's give a very kind of formulaic, if a kid does this, issue a deduction kind of system, or if a kid does this, issue a demerit. And while I believe in a behavior management system and I believe in having high expectations for our students academically and behaviorally, I think that we want to have more nuanced systems. We want to reevaluate everything, and we want to make sure that we're not perpetuating inequity and problematic systems just because we haven't taken the time to do the hard work to reevaluate and shift. And so this is just one indication that I hope folks on the in the panel discussion will see, one indication that we're committing to doing the hard work with regard to Black Lives Matter, but also with regard to various inequities in our system. We're not going to be perfect. We're still a school system. We're still going to have inequities that we have to continually address and continually listen to our scholars and our parents and our staff, and continually just commit to doing the hard work. One other thing I'll say is just that sometimes you hear people say, well, you're an educator, you're like supposed to be running these high performing schools, like don't get distracted by the political stuff, don't get distracted by things like Black Lives Matter. We're hearing that less today, but 4 or 5 years ago, I definitely heard rhetoric like that. And what I would say in response to that is, of course, I believe in running quality schools. I've committed my life work to education and to running great schools. But your life, preservation of your life and protection of your body is like a fundamental human right, that if that's being taken away at a large scale from many, many people, and largely along the lines of the color of your skin, then we all should be up in arms and in the streets about that, because that's a fundamental right that we all should be fighting to preserve, whether we're educators, full-time activists, artists, whatever we might be. And so this is just the beginning of a much more robust conversation. But as a network, we certainly have to start somewhere. Would love to know if any of the scholars or Mr. George or Mr. Rivera would like to jump in on that one too.
I think being public about your intentions to address it matters in a very thoughtful and nuanced way is a great start. I think it's incumbent upon it's a couple of things. There are systemic things that you can do and there are individual actions that you can take. Systemically, these things have to go back to the various schools. This can't be a one-off, right? This can't just be like, we had a panel, I reflected for a few days, because by July 4th, there's going to be another George Floyd, right? I mean, that's just the way our society is. Like, what are we doing on our staffs to educate ourselves? And then how do we leverage our own education to educate our kids? I think that's where, along these lines, and in addition to math, science, things like that, which are also equally important. And what are the implicit and explicit messages that you say to kids when they're right and when they're wrong? I think one thing I've had a habit of saying just personally is like, I tell kids all the time, don't be a stereotype, right? And I've said that, I'll say that probably until, I'm all gray, not salt and pepper. And I think, because I think our job as educators is to transcend the boundaries that society places upon us. The one thing about charter schools is that charter schools, one, are transformational in nature, so there's a space to be innovative. And two, they serve areas of need. There are certain areas where charter schools aren't needed, where the local residents don't think they're needed. I live in Riverdale. They don't even know what charter schools are up here. You know what I'm saying? You go to Douglaston and Queens, they don't know charter schools. But if you go to South Jamaica, Far Rockaway, or Brownsville and Brooklyn, or the South Bronx, they're everywhere. So I think we've made the initial steps in a lot of cases to go to the high needs areas. Is just continually be willing to be innovative in order to give a better service to kids. And I think this is like a good opportunity. This is the right start in a lot of this is the right start.
Yeah, I think just to add, and not to repeat what other people have said, but I think these conversations are incredibly difficult. They're really hard to have. They take planning, they take honesty, they take vulnerability. And oftentimes I think people are not quite ready for that, even though it's absolutely necessary. And so I do applaud Democracy Prep and all of us for sitting down and having this conversation to begin with. I think number two, we have had these conversations in a lot of classrooms. There's a lot of amazing teachers across Democracy Prep that are facilitating these conversations. They have been facilitating these conversations. Shout out to Freedom Prep Middle and Freedom Prep High School, but I know at both the middle and the high school, and I'm sure the elementary school, there have been plenty of conversations with students because the curriculum has been rich with Black texts, with Black authors, and stories that really represent the backgrounds of our students. And I think three, we honestly believed for a long time, and we still believe that doing what's right in the best interests of students of color has been focusing on a really rich and rigorous curriculum because we know where we want our students to go. But at times there were moments where we didn't stop to pause and reflect and say, is the student okay? Before I do that next step, before I make sure that they know math, before I make sure that they're above grade level, heading into college. And I think that's where a lot of these conversations are going. And I'm incredibly excited to bring that back to my school and back to Camden. But I think it's hard. I think some of these have happened, but I think that right now we're just starting to scratch the surface. And we have to do both. It's not one or the other. We need to make sure the students are okay. And we need to make sure that we're respecting them and honoring them and giving them appropriate curriculum and resources so they can be successful at the next level.
I think it's taken this long for this to happen because I feel like no one wants to come to school every day and be uncomfortable, especially for teachers who have come from like white backgrounds. They're not comfortable with talking about race every day and having to come in contact with people who challenge their beliefs every day. And I know for teachers, it can be especially uncomfortable coming from someone younger than them challenging their beliefs. So I feel like people don't want to be tasked with having to go into an environment where they can be open to potential attacks. And I'm not saying that students will be like, oh, you're a white person, you did this, you did that. But they don't want to be in an environment where they go and it may be taxing for them. And I know that that's something that people have to become comfortable with. And for students as well, they have to be comfortable with not everything has to be you yelling at a white person. And not everything has to be you blaming them for everything that has come from their ancestors maybe. It has to be more of a conversation where you're going towards a certain towards fixing the problem and not blaming for the problem. And that's where this conversation is going. And I know that DP, like we're going towards something where you guys are teaching students to be more conscious. And that's where this conversation comes up because students are becoming more comfortable with voicing their opinions and students are becoming more comfortable with telling the school what's going on. So I feel like with teaching conscious students, this is what happens. And students are forcing and pushing for this to happen. And that's where we're at now.
Thank you for those perspectives. A question that has come up quite a bit in the Q&A is around action steps that our attendees and everyone who listens afterward can take. And so we'd like to also open up the space to ask ways you think that people can specifically get involved if they do want to continue to have their voices heard and continue to speak out against injustice. What are some ideas that you may have?
So from an activist standpoint, A lot of the things that we're urging people to do here in Louisiana look completely different demographically than where a lot of you are. But I think things that are replicatable regardless of where you are. And it's not necessarily about demonstrations. It's not necessarily about protests, because some of the sensationalism does not last year long. Like, that's just the reality of it. People go back to work, people go back to their classrooms, and the real work begins with what we're doing every day once we go home back to our communities. It's where you're spending your dollars. It's who you're calling. It's who you're watching. It's who you invest your time and energy into. So it's saying you have to give up a lot of those conveniences of supporting national chains and support a small Black business or creating a small Black business, because activism is creating a Black business. Activism is supporting a Black business. It's supporting Black influencers. And in my case, for a lot of this is the time you give to Black students. It's the energy you invest in them. And my second grade teacher, actually, the reason why I'm here is Michelle Gigg. And I remember it was her first year of teaching, and she was my second grade teacher. She ain't know what was going on, but her investment into us emotionally and mentally, it was the exposure that she gave us. Those are priceless things that I nor my peers, who now 6 of my peers who still keep up with Michelle from Democracy Prep Baton Rouge to this day, are all about to graduate this year. We are all doing amazing things in remarkable fields, from engineering. I'm in politics. Several of our peers are business owners. Like, they're doing different things in their communities. And that's because somebody invested in us at a very young age and said, you are valuable, you are worth it. I see you, I empathize with you. So I don't think activism or keeping your voice heard in this grand scale way is something that is sustainable. I think it's what you do every day that counts. It's how you take care of yourself is what counts. And being an activist, this stuff is like, it's kind of lame most days. Like, it's not fun. It's not glorifiable. And even MLK at his height, he was not a liked man. It is not something that you're going to get roses for every day. So I think it's truly, truly about support. It's about how are we building capacity, and are we connecting with people and empathizing with people? It's the relationships that we build that move, because it's masses that make movements, not individuals. It's not one voice shouting into a void that changes the tide. It's all of our collective in unison voices. So it's really that strategy, that under the table strategy, that, oh, we met 50 teenagers in a basement, or we all collected on Twitter and we said the same thing. That is what matters. It's about how are we building a greater collectivity? How are we investing in our youth, and where we are spending our dollars? Because economic development in Black and brown communities is where it starts. It is education, but that economic development and exposure is what children truly need in their communities.
There's another great question, Rashid, about changing police practices. So what can we do to change this besides protesting? Is there any way we can reform the police force to become less prejudiced and regulate their power over our community? And any panelist can take that one.
Become civically engaged. I think we're told, like, vote, but I think it goes beyond voting. Is actively participating, is keeping abreast of current events, is writing and contacting politicians. Is Terrence Floyd said something about yesterday, George Floyd's brother, in his speech, he said that we can't just vote for the president. We have to vote for everything, the preliminaries, the judges, the sheriffs. Like, we have to be politically active. We have to leverage what we do, which is using our voice to get what we want. And I think that any politician worth their salt is going to be responsive to the people who they're accountable to. And they're only accountable to people that vote. They're not accountable to the citizenry. So I think it's important for us to just continually just push our activity and push our awareness, and either run yourself or support candidates who have the beliefs that you have, or use your voice to help shift the beliefs of candidates that are here. I think, again, going back to, I think someone said a little bit earlier, but like, the Democrats that signed off the crime bill of 94 are now talking about prison reform in 2020. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's because they've been pushed to change their beliefs based on the results of their actions. And I think that's something that you continuously do. You'll get more out of police and the people that hold them accountable.
My answer to that question would be for other policemen or policewomen to hold each other accountable. Like now, more and more, like you see police officers not holding each other accountable for their actions. But I've seen now, like on social media, that there are some police officers that are at the rallies that are holding other police officers accountable for their actions. Specifically in the George Floyd case, you see that that the man obviously couldn't breathe, and the other policeman that was watching the Chauvin, the police officer that's being charged with this murder, they're just watching him and they're just standing there. I feel like more police officers need to be more proactive in the way that they handle situations with other police officers, and that's the way that we could get change.
Yeah, I think combining both questions a little bit here. I think there's a few things that people can do. One is we have to engage in these conversations. It is a must. I know I said it earlier, but I want to repeat. We have to be talking to each other about these things. We can't shy away from these really difficult conversations. There's time to reflect, and there's also time to engage. Number two, to echo Mr. George, we have to vote. Absolutely a must. It is critical. We have to take some accountability for what happened 4 years ago. Not enough people voted, and we got what we got, and we've been dealing with it ever since. So it's incredibly important. In a few months, there's elections happening around the country. Number three, we got to read and stay informed. We have to be aware that there's media out there with their own agenda, and they're going to try to push the stories that they want us to read. And so it's our responsibility to comb through a lot of that and to make sure that we're getting the facts. If you're paying attention to the Philadelphia news, you would think that all that happened over the weekend was looting, because that's all that was portrayed to us. But in actuality, there was a lot of peaceful protests in Camden and Philadelphia. And I think lastly, in classrooms, we have to let kids push the conversations. And instead of, it's okay to go into a conversation not knowing what you want to instill on students, but instead allowing the students and allowing the kids to really push how they're feeling, and to push what they know, and for them to, again, make their own assumptions and to develop their own ideas, because they're going out into that world. And we're prepping kids for college, but we're not going to be there in those college classrooms. They're going to be there sitting with with their peers that think differently and look differently and might act a little bit differently. And they need to be ready to engage in those conversations as well.
So another final question. First of all, thank you. How do scholars at DP who are not in DP's high schools get parallel examples of Black excellence besides a Black History Month celebration? So what are thoughts on what that could look like for elementary and middle school scholars? And are there any other experiences that are missing, and how would we include them?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. So the question from the audience was, how do scholars at DP who aren't in high school, so I think it's reflecting also on the middle school experiences that you had, how do they receive parallel examples of the Black excellence that we're talking about besides Black History Month? Because it seems to be that the question is saying that a lot of our focus on Black excellence happens in that month of February. And the question is, how do we expand that? What does it look like? And what are some experiences that we could also include in our celebration of the concept of Black excellence?
Well, unfortunately, you can answer first.
I feel like is starting with like the mindset that we they have of like Black excellence, to only believe that during Black history is when Black excellence is available, or like that's when we celebrate it. Happens every day. Like we are like the history. Like every day is a new page in history, and like it's always gonna be Black history. So just changing the mindset that we have of what Black excellence is, I feel like they would more like appreciate like and understand like it's happening all around you. You just aren't seeing it.
I think a way for the elementary and middle school kids to get better examples of Black excellence would be to have Black teachers. Like I feel like on a firsthand experience, I can learn about it all day, but unless I see it, it's not going to be real for me. So I feel like having Black teachers would be the first step to let kids know that there can be an example of Black excellence. The second step would be to have the conversations every day. If you just talk about Black culture in February, yeah, I'm waiting for February to come around, but we're not talking about this every day. And it's like what happens after February, Black people don't exist anymore. Like that's not the reality of the situation. Third of all, what we also need is for like the conversation to be more normalized, because if we're not like, I don't even know how to explain it. If kids in elementary school are having all of their content being centralized on like European history and white history, like that, like that's not what they're gonna grow up and go into the world to learn about. That's not what they're gonna be focused on. They need to be focused on their actual true history, and they need to be focused on how Black people can grow up and like learn about that from a young age. And like Myra was saying, have her second grade teacher be more educated about the Black experience. Have your younger teacher be more educated about what it means to be a Black person in America. If you don't have those examples of even your white teachers being educated about your culture at a young age, you're gonna grow up missing those crucial moments of development.
I definitely agree with the point of having Black teachers, because I know from experience, I know how important having Black teachers to instill um, Black history on me as a young, how important that was to me when I was younger. When I was in Bronx Prep before Democracy Prep came to our school, I had in sixth grade I had two teachers, Miss Wright and Miss Jones. They were really really good and proactive in teaching young sixth graders about the Black experience and what it is out here in this world for Black, the like reality for Black people. And it's always important to teach younger kids, because like that's when our minds are more like tender, and like when you grow up, we have our whole life ahead of us, so it's easier for them to carry it on with them for a longer period of time. Also, another thing is to normalize more interactions between middle school and high school students. And my school, like the middle school and high school, are seen as two separate schools, and we don't really have that much um, interaction with the middle schools. With the middle school, my school doesn't have elementary school, but we don't have that much interaction with the middle school scholars. And I feel like them coming up into the high school section, they do need guidance. They do need people who like me, that are also kids like themselves, to give them some tips and some tips on how to navigate throughout in the world, being young and also a Black student.
I agree with what they said about having Black teachers. I feel like having Black teachers, like someone that looks like you, will make you feel more comfortable in the classroom, and even having conversations like these, because it's different, because now you know like that person experienced the same thing you experience, so you're able to talk more comfortably, rather than having someone that doesn't look like you teaching you about your history, which could have a negative impact on the person's mindset.
Also, I like to add that having more groups, clubs, and stuff like that, that's more centered around teaching Black history, and and doing it in a fun way. Most of the time, being in class isn't always the most ideal way that people want to learn their history. I was part of like a gentleman's club in my school, and it was a great way for me to connect with other Black students, and also with with the Black teacher that's also very proactive in helping the community. Most of the times we did different outreach, like feeding homeless on Thanksgiving. It's always about um, how the image is portrayed and what are different ways that we can educate young kids.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughts and your contributions. We understand that this is an ongoing conversation. This was one of the first of hopefully several more of these specific larger conversations, including a number of different stakeholders from a number of different areas of the democracy prep community. It is 3:30 and we do want to respect everyone's time. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any feedback on the session or any thoughts, any suggested speakers or volunteering to speak in the future. But thank you again. And I'll turn it over to you, Natasha, in case, Ms. Rivers, if there's anything else you'd like to.
Thank you so much, Rashid. And all I would say is thank you so much to the panelists, scholars, teachers. I know you have so much to do right now, and leaders to just close out the year and make sure everything happens as it should. But this was an important moment for us to take, and for you to devote 90 minutes today to making sure we could talk about this in a rich way is just, I'm so grateful for. Thank you to Mr. Hammond. Thank you so much to Myra. We really appreciate you joining us on relatively short notice and just dropping your nuggets of wisdom on us. Thank you so much. This will be one of many, and I just want to kind of reiterate something Myra said, which is that the hard work is going to come when we have all these other competing priorities, and we're back to the grind of what it means to be true activists when it's 3-4 months from now and the sensationalism of this moment is gone. But I would challenge people to remember and to make their own commitments about what it is they are going to do moving forward to address this issue. And also just more largely at Democracy Prep, what are ways we can continue to create forums for scholars to really talk about what are the issues. As Ariana said, if you nurture conscious students, this is what you're going to get. And this is exactly what we want, but we also need to create more forums for them to be able to tell us how we can continue to improve and how we can continue to better educate and prepare them for the next step. So this is just a beginning, but I'm really excited for the future and for more conversations like this. So thank you so much for dedicating your time today. All right, goodbye everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Take care, goodbye everyone.